Greetings, viewers. Welcome back to New Australian Bulletin. We're thrilled beyond sanity to have with us once again three of the foremost intellects in the field of anti-white dogma. By now, you should be familiar with them. Nick Griffin, former BNP leader, EU MP, and England's finest living nationalist. Tom Sunic is a former diplomat, former professor in political science, linguist, and author of several books in German, English, French, and Croatian translations. Then we have Dr. Jim Saleam, the godfather of Australian nationalism. And finally, there is me, your host, Captain Bobo Lestrange. Welcome, gentlemen. How often has a new white nationalist organisation shown up after the last one was deactivated? The new group isn't interested in the mistakes of the last lot. Everything's going to be different this time. There is new leadership, but the new leaders are still indirectly tied to the old. The group bonds over the cult of Adolf Hitler. Maybe it doesn't. Their activities are often mundane, like standing alongside flags and proffering salutes. It may be letterboxing flyers. What starts online eventually leaks out one way or another. Members can't hide their identity long. Sooner or later, the whole gamut of state auxiliaries is doxing them. They're branded as extremists. When the trouble begins, these instigators are wearing Teflon. That brings us to the topic of this video, provocateur groups, better known as honeypots. These groups are invariably aimed at youth. They operate like subcultures outside of political activity. Nearly always, they stand in opposition to established nationalists. They become a tool to invalidate the old guard with a type of cancel culture as used by the left. I'll start by throwing this to Nick Griffin for comment. He's currently involved in a struggle for common sense back home in Blighty.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think you put your finger on the key point when you use the word cult, because there's two things going on here. First of all, one of the things that young men all over the world do, sort of adolescent lads, just part of our inborn makeup, is they want to form a gang. So the youth cult is something which is a deracinated version of what a healthy tribe would do in terms of training its young men. Send them out, they go off and form a gang, they hunt lions, they kill the other tribe or whatever, then they come back. Missing that, young lads left to their own devices form youth cults. And one of the things about a youth cult, the key thing, is that it's precisely because of what it is, it develops automatically and instinctively mechanisms which repel other people and tell the people in the cult that there's something special in this cult. So you've got that as the basis, and then in come the various groups which hate our kind of ideas and politics, whether it's the hardcore anti-white Jewish lobby, whether it's the state security services, the far left or whatever. All these people come in and they take advantage of this because obviously to them, it's really good if the nationalist opposition succeeds in demonizing itself. So it frightens off everybody else and it makes nationalism repulsive. So every time we've had, the classic example in Britain was a man called Ray Hill, who was working for the Zionist anti-fascist group Searchlight. And everything that he did was designed to push the movements he was involved with, even if only on the fringes, into more and more craze and blatant extremism, Nazi salutes and all the rest of it. And he said in his autobiography that he would get involved. You mentioned the way these groups, one come, one goes. He said this whole kaleidoscope of group, coming and exploding and then trying to get people together for unity. They were deliberately keeping that going because it meant there's a constant changeover in leadership. People don't know, there's no capability in the organization to build up wisdom and experience. Constant change, and all the time through this change, the one constant is that the people who really hate us are pushing our young lads to go more and more extreme. It's been happening for years and it's still happening. As you said, I'm fighting against it at this very minute in Britain.
Now, Tom Sunic, you know a bit about how the liberal system criminalises its opponents. Do you believe these groups are fertilised by the state to ensure an ongoing narrative?
Well, first, let me extend my greetings to all of you, and I would certainly like to extend my greetings to younger Australians, and I hope to be joining you folks possibly early next year, and I will be at your service, and I'm at your disposition. Anyway, I would like to follow up on what Nick just said. I've been dealing and I've been writing about this extensively, about this semantic distortion. So let's put it in plain English, in verbal, conceptual distortions of words like Nazism, fascism, white supremacism, nationalism. These words, by and large, have a rather negative connotation nowadays. The reason being, I guess the answer is quite simple. We are not masters of discourse. I guess first and foremost, and this is also my advice, especially to younger white Australians, you have to know exactly what type of words you use in your narrative, in your daily discussion. And of course, you have to be extremely careful when you read the press, the system press, when you read the Australian mainstream news. Let me give you an example, and I will illustrate that again. I hope I'm not repeating myself, because I think last time I also talked about this, about the semantic distortions in communist Yugoslavia, where I grew up. Like back in the 60s and 70s, when I was a young boy, before I immigrated to the States, the word Croat, even the word Croat had a very negative connotation, negative meaning. It was by and large by the system apparatus. It was used along with the word nationalist, which had an extremely bad meaning. And of course, the word anti-fascism was literally on all wavelengths in every single document, believe it or not. I remember even my school certificates back in the early 60s were signed at the bottom of the page, at the bottom of the certificate. There was the expression, "Smrt fašizmu, sloboda narodu," death to fascism and freedom to the people. And again, I see this trend, I see this atmosphere, this academic, intellectual, mainstream media atmosphere now spreading all over the West. And again, my suggestion is, especially to a younger audience, to our younger viewers, to be extremely careful what type of words they use. Now, let me just backpedal a little bit. I'm aware of the fact that I can walk literally on all fours, and if I start now showering my disclaimers and saying, no, I'm not a Nazi, I'm not an Ustasha, I'm not a fascist, I'm not an SS fan, whatever, regardless of all of it, the system itself, be it the Guardian, be it the BBC, be it whatever, you name it, the New York Times, especially, be it CNN, they will always slam you with this etiquette, with this label, you're a fascist, you're a white supremacist. Again, I'm aware of that, but my point is, I don't want to pontificate about this, but I need to say that don't use this paraphernalia, don't use these icons, which are simply, this is passé now. Those icons like Nazi icons, or for that matter, fascist icons or Ustashi icons, they can get you into trouble. And it actually just brings more water. It actually gives more fodder to the system press in order to demonize you further, in order to make you look stupid and bad and whatever. So again, my point is, and we can talk about this later on, is I learned very early on, after I finished my hippie days in India, in Amsterdam, back in the early 70s, that the best way to fight the system is not with the long hair or earrings, for that matter, or with tattoos, I'm sorry about this, or for that matter, with some pseudo-Nazi, Hollywood Nazi type of insignia. The best way to fight the system is by, well, decently dressed, or getting myself some degree, getting myself some trade, and just incorporate myself into the society, integrate myself into the system. And believe it or not, I also realized, and I realized that you can better fight the system. You can better fight this repression, this intellectual terrorism that we've been subjected to over the last 10 or 20 years. I will stop here for a while. I will give you a chance, and also to Nick Griffin, to say a few more words, and then I can continue along those lines. And I certainly would like to specify a little bit more those semantic distortions, because when I, for instance, just last sentence, when I, for instance, read the New York Times, I first look at the sentence and I want to see what type of applause this gentleman uses in his sentence, and I also want to see what type of adjectives, that hyperbolas, he uses. And the minute I come across the expression white supremacism, which is absolute neologism, I don't know who actually coined this expression, white supremacism. It's even hard to translate it into solid German or French. It's impossible to translate it even into the Croatian language. So they have to resort to the white supremacism and the quotation marks. And again, we have to fight this lingo. We have to actually come to terms with those words, and we have to propose something else.
Now, Jim, it's like a script, isn't it? One group comes along, it fades, in comes another group. Do share your thoughts.
Okay, well, look, I'll contribute to the pot in a slightly different way. If you look at the activities of intelligence workers and so on, if you can be guaranteed that there will be certain outcomes from the group that's professing something that's a little bit silly, you can step back and allow it to happen. I was a student of Russian history. And if we look at communistic type groups, what would happen? A number of people would get together, they'd foment a strike, they'd obtain some sort of printing apparatus, they'd put out some leaflets, they'd make a liaison with a factory next door or another group of would-be revolutionaries somewhere else. No one would really know much about anything. And then they'd get ready for their big demonstration to make their big point. And it was at that moment the police would come and arrest the lot, and they'd all be on their way to Siberia because the thing was well and truly infiltrated by the Okhrana at the start. If we look at the way a lot of really odd groups behave, that is how they behave. A few young blokes get together, they start to make various noises, they grab some ideas off the internet that they think match up with what they want to do. No one's particularly well thought out. I'm not saying they're all dumb people or something. They're not kindergarten kids. Some of them have been through high school. There might be a few students there. But no one's actually seriously studied ideology or politics. And then inevitably someone might even do the establishment a favour and start talking about maybe bombing something or burning something. And it's at that moment it's all over. And organisations are then banned, labels are put on them as terrorism, and anyone surviving that group and going somewhere else into the next group creates the same set of circumstances all over again. This is something that started to happen here. And one thing you can guarantee, we all joke amongst us that one thing the establishment can count on is that one or the other of the two major political parties or one or the other of the two major blocs, as it is in Europe, will always win an election. Well, obviously, in this sort of a game, you can always bet that some group will do exactly what you want them to do. So they allow it this way. And I think the communists used to use the word spontaneism, and something just springs up spontaneously, but it only ever gets from maybe stage 1 to stage 2 or 3. It never goes any further. And this can now be counted on. So there's endless political abortions carried out of each one of these groups that comes along. So that's my initial comment.
So Nick, what are the red flags for you when you see a group emerge, and what red flags tell you that it's likely, got a bit of honey in the jar?
Well, coming back for a moment to what I was saying about the youth cult, you do have to understand that there's plenty of young lads out there who will make these mistakes by themselves from this combination of instinct, wanting to be a special group, an in-group, and also out of genuinely good heart. And when they're told that by the media constantly that if you want to stand up for your people in any way, shape or form, you are a racist, fascist, Nazi, want to gas 6 million Jews, then it's inevitable that some young lads think, well, if that's it, that's it. So we mustn't let the youngsters who hopefully will watch this think that we're condemning all of them because they feel that way. I understand how they feel. I felt that way in some ways myself many, many years ago. It took me years to understand that actually this is a stupid dead end and there's better ways to do things. But certainly, as well as that stupid innocence that there is, especially among an arrogant innocence amongst youngsters, there is, as everyone here said, there's a deliberate honeypot approach. So it's impossible to distinguish which is stupidity and which is evil, but they both have the same bad effect. So the things that one way or another mark something out as being counterproductive, if not a honey trap, obviously are the minute people are talking about Nazism, violence against other races, just what is called hate speech, but what even we can see is hate-filled speech. The minute you go down that road and you start using these symbols, basically, well, from the 1945, you're talking almost 100 years ago. This is a sort of political necrophilia. And the minute you see that, you know that there's a serious problem. And the problem isn't just that it means that these groups aren't sort of going to get somewhere or kids are going to go to prison. But maybe just throw a hand back to you. There's 5 things I want to point out to the youngsters that some will watch this. We've only got to save one youngster from making this terrible mistake to have made our hour here together worthwhile. And we can probably save more than that. So when they go down this road and I'm going to wear my heart on my sleeve and I don't care and I'm tough and big, it puts good people off. So it automatically means that their group is going to be smaller than they would hope. It attracts crazies and psychopaths. So it automatically means that their group is going to be unstable and problem and potentially dangerous. It allows all the, in broad sense, the opposition, everyone who hates us, to demonize not just that movement, actually, but anyone who has those sort of thoughts, who uses some of the same slogans, who addresses some of the same issues, is then tarred with their brush. It helps, and this is very important, it helps opposition groups such as Hope Not Hate in Britain, and we've all got them. It helps them to raise funds. Their business is getting money out of silly elderly Jews and out of left-wing councils and trade unions to fight the fascists. And unless you've got some big, scary, horrible fascists, they don't get any money. So it's helping them to raise money. And finally, nowadays, this is the one that's becoming more and more important, I think, it prejudices judges and juries so that youngsters who come up in front of them, and I've been through a number of these court cases, you stand a chance of getting off. Certainly in Britain with a jury system, you still stand a chance of getting off if you're talking about the issues that ordinary working class people feel and understand in their terminology, in things that they don't find frightening. But the minute the prosecution can say, well, here's the swastikas, here's Hitler, here's this, that, the jury just turn off and they're immediately against that person. So you put all those things together, and this is not just political, it's also organizational and personal suicide. It's a really, really bad thing. And I've had to say this to generation after generation, and I guess we're doing it now. This isn't going over old ground for people who've heard it all before. There's 15, 16, 17-year-olds who are going to see what we're saying today, and it could make a really good difference for them for the future.
Have you had experience with this kind of thing, Tom, in Europe?
Well, I must have seen, if not dozens, hundreds and hundreds of what we call Hollywood Nazis in Croatia, in Germany, and during my speeches in France and also in California. And I must say, there are some very interesting people, intelligent folks, but I did feel a little bit nervous, though. I know always when I see those Hollywood Nazis, I just don't feel very comfortable in their company at all. Either they are government plants, and I guess, or they certainly don't have no idea of what's going on in the world. I just don't want to rehash the things that Nick just said. Just using this paraphernalia, using this iconography that was once upon a time very popular. Let's say it was in Europe in their late 30s and early 40s. it's simply a non-starter. So regardless of what I may think about some Ustasha intellectuals or intellectuals who are close to National Socialism in Germany during the Weimar Republic and later on from 1933 until 45, regardless of the fact that there were some highly intelligent people writing about race and economy. I mean, I could now go on and just mention quite a few of names. It's simply, as I keep saying, and I would again appeal to a younger audience, don't use this insignia, which is a non-starter. It will first and foremost alienate lots of your folks, lots of your cousins, your friends, and secondly, it can get you into trouble. Now, once again, I repeat, regardless of the fact that your disclaimers or that you are not a Nazi, we will always be pushed into this garbage can, if I can put it somewhat bluntly, that we are all Nazis, that Tom Sunic is an anti-Semite, that he is a Nazi, a neo-Nazi, whatever. But it's one thing when I openly display those signs, and it's entirely different thing what I privately may think about certain issues about National Socialism, fascism. I've been dealing with this issue. In fact, this was part of my doctoral dissertation as well. But the Weimar Republic, the conservative revolution in the Weimar Republic, about names such as Carl Schmitt and then Wilfreda Pareto, Wilhelm Sombart, and so on and so forth. Again, I would urge your folks to study very well the German language. It's just a good language, high language, a very, very rich language. And again, let me make a little digression here. I feel very, very much irritated when I see and when I read in academic journals, let alone in the mainstream media, the term Nazi. The term Nazi was not in official usage in the National Socialist Germany. It was not banned, but it was considered a pejorative type of expression. It's just like using the word commie. So regardless of whether I hate or love National Socialism, you don't want to use in academic journals and your speeches the word Nazi. Nazi, the term Nazi, this acronym, or what do you call it, this shortened version of National Socialism, has a very highly pejorative meaning. It was actually launched in the early 20s in the Soviet Union. It was actually recuperated then during the Spanish Civil War. Nazi, everybody was, I guess, fighting the Nazis and their supplements in the Franco Spain and so on. And then, unfortunately, this word Nazi, which is a wrong word, it's a wrong pejorative word, has been now well embedded in academic discourse, in the mainstream media, and so on. Again, as I say, I'm not a Nazi, neither do I want to explain to post and display and posture with those Nazi signs. But if I want to write a scholarly piece on National Socialism, as I recently did on race and racism and racial studies in the Occidental Observer, you may want to have a look at it. It's a very well written piece.
Yeah, I read it. Yeah.
Geography. And of course, they also had a piece which is highly, I think it's you can judge it yourself. But I do provide, however, lots of footnotes in German, English, French, and so on. The word socialism was very popular in the Ustasha Croatia from 41 to 45. The word socialism was very popular among nationalists as well. But nobody used the word Nazi. It was used by the opponents of National Socialism. Again, I don't want to trouble you now and pester you with those linguistic escapades, but it's incredibly important to find out, to reiterate that the term Nazi has a pejorative meaning. It's similar to the word commie. Like, for instance, if I was to submit a piece on, let's say, on communist Soviet Union and its internal structure, let's say for Foreign Affairs Journal, I wouldn't use the word commie unless I use it under quotation marks, because commie, in terms of its resonance, in terms of its pejorative reflection, has the same weight, has the same hyperbolic weight as the word Nazi. So if you want to stay objective, if you want to stay neutral without voicing your private value judgments, use the word National Socialism versus the word national communism. Again, I repeat, if you study the documents, the German Foreign Ministry of Foreign Affairs during the rule of not Rosenberg, was this, I forgot his name. Not a single line in the documents, let alone intellectuals, academics who are close to National Socialism, like Alfred Bäumler. He wrote much about Nietzsche. Ernest Krieg, he wrote about education. He was the top scholars, and they were members of the National Socialist Party. So was Heidegger until 45. Not a single word of Nazi you will find. You find National Socialism. Again, as I say, regardless of what you may think or not think about National Socialism and how ugly and how bad they were. Unfortunately, you know what happened it was even earlier, prior to the Second World War, and then afterwards in the Columbia University, and then afterwards at Berkeley, early 50s and late 40s, early 50s, lots of Jewish intellectuals, lots of also intellectuals who are liberal intellectuals. They sort of turned this word Nazism into a very popular a game change. What do you call it? What's the right English word? Into a sort of a very popular word, which has become by now embedded in our daily discourse, which I find completely wrong and false. I'm talking now from the professorial perspective, of course. I hope that the younger audience understands what I'm talking about. So
I think they get it.
With other words, fascism, the fascism had if you study the word etymology of fascism, again, I can mention the name of Ernst Nolte. It's a very semi-politically correct author, great German scholar who passed away a couple of years back. He wrote the word about the European Civil War, and then there was also passaging. He wrote about those linguistic war and disputes among scholars, and I think it was a good author. So again, if you want to find a good book on National Socialism, objective book and fascism, read Ernest Nolte. He's very popular. He was never banned, quite to the contrary. He was awarded with high prizes, even in what they call it now, liberal Germany. And I think he will give it to a younger audience in Australia. His books were mostly translated, the European Civil War, the Europäische Bürgerkrieg, I think it was translated into English. He will give you a global idea of this manipulation of those words, Nazi, commie, and so on, that unfortunately are still in town, which still prevent us from normally communicating and for explaining what we stand for. We as white nationalists, what we stand for. We are not some demons. We are not some monstrous animals. And now the word itself of National Socialism and Nazism and fascism, they are no longer expressions. They are no longer vocables. So what do you call it? Locutions. Okay, let's use the word locutions. They've turned into the symbols, not of the evil, but of the absolute cosmic evil. So when you call somebody, like Tom Sunic or Nick Griffin or whatever, Nathan or Jim Saleam is a Nazi, then you're no longer a human being. You are some extraterrestrial monster that needs to be smashed and crushed. This is unfortunately the lingo we have to put up with, and I'm sick and tired of reading the Guardian or the New York Times or watching the CNN. What the anchors, it's just a bunch of liars or idiots or hypocrites. That's all what I can say.
Can I come in?
Yes.
Unless Jim, you've been quiet for a bit. Have you got anything you particularly need to say right now?
I'll just very quickly follow on from something that Tom said. I actually had a conversation with a young person somewhere at some time, I won't say where, who was attempting to make out that he was some sort of National Socialist. And I actually said to this bloke, I said, well, oddly, and I said it's a term that we might not want to use. I said, I hate to say this to you, but you're a neo-Nazi. And he said, what do you mean by that? I said, because what you're saying has got nothing to do with that historical subject. I said, I'm not even sure what label I can possibly put on you. I said, but if I did it for shorthand and I used the journalist's words and called you a neo-Nazi, I wouldn't be completely wrong. And the second point that has come out of our discussion, taking what Nick said about cults and Tom there about particular ideas, is that I often wonder what it is that some people who fall into these traps think it is that they're actually fighting. And it seems that they're also, in their mind, fighting a cosmic enemy that you can't necessarily locate. He doesn't necessarily have headquarters. He's everywhere. and you have to oppose him. And he's full of some evil demonology himself. But at the end of the day, the best protest that they can seem to come up with is damaging a Jewish place of worship, or planting a swastika next to one of these so-called Holocaust museums or something like that. It makes you wonder what it is that they think they're actually doing. And they're not standing up for the ordinary working, productive people of their countries who are being replaced or colonised. They're not fighting against imperialist war. They're not fighting against anything like that. They're doing something else. And
but to play devil's advocate, right, if we take a look at what's driving this great tsunami of anti-white replacement, you will inevitably find in that Western liberal ideology Zionism.
Well, you will. And, but all I'm saying is that rather than ideologically critique Zionism and find ways to fight Zionism, they seem to target ethereal people or places, or they're making some other statement that belongs to the ether. It doesn't belong to the real world. I remember a dialogue I had with a person, I won't say when or where again, but he didn't, despite his so-called views, he didn't even want to take up a stand about Palestine or fight against the attack on Assad's Syria, or the war in Iraq. That wasn't what he was on about. He was on about something else. And I suppose, before I throw it back to you, gentlemen, it seems that the enemy media, as you pointed out, Tom, the Guardian, these sort of people who are the absolute ideological gatekeepers of the liberal regime, they also, when they attack us, okay, they can call you a fascist or me a fascist, Nick a fascist, anyone a fascist. They can do what they want. But they're not exactly even defining what it is precisely our crime is. As you said, it's monstrous evil. That, yes, we're dehumanised, demonised and whatever. But again, there's no specific crime alleged. And I find that quite remarkable. Is it that we're seeing maybe two sides? They've looked in the mirror at each other and they bounce it backwards and forwards? I'm not sure. I'd like to seek comment before Nick leads, as he wanted to lead. Sorry about that. I went off track.
No, it's all right.
Nick, you were eager to say something?
Yeah, a couple of things actually now. First of all, obviously we know who in our countries does more than any other group to promote, the Great Replacement. Yep, we know that, and we could talk about that all the time. But I think you've also got to look at the fact that the demographic, we've only got a Great Replacement because our people aren't having enough children. If our people were having enough children, there'd be far less of a gap. Couldn't be replaced without being exterminated. We're being replaced because there's a gap, there's a vacuum. So it's easy for people, various interest groups, not just the Zionist operation, but capitalists as well. They bring people in to fill the vacuum. But it's not just us who are in danger here. The demographic winter is striking, for instance, South Korea and Singapore and China just as badly as it is us. So we've got this special problem that there's a group within our society who particularly hates us and is anxious to take advantage of it. But the demographic winter is something much deeper. Basically, the only common denominator that all of those countries have got, China included, if you add state before the word, is capitalism. This is the modern world. It's capitalism, it's consumerism, whatever it is. It mitigates against people having families and thereby their DNA and their culture surviving. That's what's going on. You can't fight that by screaming about it's the Jews. You can only fight that by having kids. That's the crux of it. That's the only thing. And it's a particularly important message for youngsters. Now, I want to come on to the bit that I was wanting to raise before, because Tom had talked there about, one of the things he said was, the trouble with this is it's going to get you into trouble. And I'd said that one of the things it does is it gets sent, it horrifies juries and judges, so it gets you sent to prison. Now, I know there'll be some of the youngsters watching this who'll say, oh, these old farts, they've had their time, they've been in prison, or they've had their brush with the law, they've lost their bottle. I'm brave, I'm tough, I don't mind going to prison, I'll be a martyr. So a little bit about political martyrdom. because that's what a lot of them think they're doing when they go to prison. And the last of these fake pseudo gang honeypot operations operating in Britain was called National Action. There's a new one now, but National Action was the last one. It's now gone, it's now banned, and so on. They had a couple of hundred members, roughly, people really close to them. 23 are now in prison. So it's about a 10% casualty rate, and the rest, they've lost college, jobs, family, all the rest of it. They've had their lives ruined as well. So this is quite catastrophic. But I think probably some of those, when they were up in court or going to be in court, they're thinking, I'm going to be a martyr for the cause. But of course, they're not a martyr for the cause, because you're only a martyr if your suffering attracts the attention and the sympathy of lots more people, thereby in some way or other strengthening the cause. And when your iconography and your slogans and so on put everybody else, it doesn't do that. It just means that you rot in prison by yourself. So I want to give an example to show that I'm not soft, and you're not soft either. Right now, there's a man who is a genuine martyr in prison in our sort of world, English-speaking world in Ireland, and his name is Enoch Burke. And although he's in Southern Ireland, you think of it traditionally as a Catholic country, he's actually a Calvinist. He was teaching at the Church of Ireland, that's an Anglican school. And one of the pupils decided that they were no longer a he, they were a she. Yep. So so they said, I no longer want to be referred to as he, I want to be referred to as they. And the school said to the teachers, right, you've got to address these people as they. And he said, I'm a Christian, this is a nonsense, I'm not going to. So they put him off on full pay, wouldn't let him come to school. And he said, look, I'm a Christian, I believe in the work ethic and so on, I'm going to come to school, I'm not going to take money for nothing, I'm coming to school, I'm ready to teach. So in the end, the school took an injunction out against him, and he still turned up at school. So yesterday, a judge sent him to prison. So he's now in Mountjoy Jail, which if you know your Fenian history, you'll know the songs about Mountjoy Jail, because that's where the Brits put and executed or allowed hunger strikes, people starved to death. Huge numbers of Irish Republicans back in the in the old days. So he's now in Mountjoy Jail, and he's there for contempt of court, which in Ireland means he's there until he purges his contempt. And he said, I've no intention of purging my contempt. I will stay in here because I shouldn't be in here. It's wrong. I want to draw attention to it. And instead of, like the National Action people, being despised and forgotten, he's now mobilising this an enormous groundswell. And although he's a Protestant, the Catholics in Ireland are saying, well, he's fighting our fight, we stand with this man. And all the various Protestants, from Calvinists to evangelicals, they're all saying, this man is there for us, and he's fighting our fight, and we must get behind him. And it's absolutely galvanising a new cross-community movement, which is a wonderful thing in the context of Northern Ireland and the horrors that have gone on there. So that's someone who, right in this day and age, has picked a fight with the state, to fight that in practical terms he can't win, he's in prison, but in moral terms he's already won. He has made a martyr of himself, and it's for the good of the cause. And so that's the sort of thing that can still be done. But someone who makes a martyr of himself by wearing a ridiculous armband and giving 90-year-old salutes and spouting verbiage which every ordinary person regards as appalling, that man is not a martyr, that man is a fool.
Don't mention the war. Tom.
Yes, let's just go back for a while and look at some positive sides. As of recently, I'm sure you recall that was last week or 2 weeks back, Trump himself at his rally in Pennsylvania. I used to live there in the vicinity near Huntington. And he gave a speech, and I guess when was the day after, this old incontinental man, senile man, he called him a semi-fascist or something. So why is this good for all of us? Because this word fascism has become so liquid, so worn out, so trivial that it simply doesn't have any, at least in my ears, it doesn't have any demonizing meaning any longer. So I guess it's good for all of us, because this word has become so trivialized, so on all sides, on left and right, to the extent that everybody can call each other a Nazi or a fascist. And again, probably my probable privilege is that I grew up, as I said earlier, in communist Yugoslavia, where this word fascism and Nazism and Ustashism was part and parcel of the communist official vernacular, and of course of left-wing intellectuals in France in the 60s, 68ers in England and elsewhere. So I guess we just got to put up with that, and I'm pretty much sure this world will peter out at some point. That it's at some point, I'm not ruling out people will be proud to even portray themselves as full-fledged Nazis or fascists or whatever. Now, having said this, I guess I had something else on my mind, and I'm sorry. Can you please recap briefly, Nathan, your question, and I can briefly answer to it. I just don't want to get out of the
I mean, we've sort of drifted a bit from the original topic, which was to try to get right under the skin of the honeypot actions and the provocation by the state. And I know that Nick would, because I was listening to your show the other day, and you were talking about a particular group that was asking its members to send. They've got to hit the gym. It's de rigueur and they're required to send in a picture of how well their muscles have grown. And
well, again, real briefly, I will stop here. Just ask yourself a standard question: cui bono? You know. Well, of course, let's say if a synagogue gets smeared or if there's some graffiti on it, you always ask yourself a question: cui bono? Who benefits from it? I mean, the answer is always simple. So again, I keep advising to younger audience, younger nationals, don't get involved in that. Don't get involved with folks who are now who are trying to whip you up to some worldwide white revolution and all this bullshit, all this nonsense. That's a non-starter. That's a non-starter.
Tom, can I just lead you somewhere here? You're a bit of an authority on the US, right? At the moment, the absolute polarization between the liberal Democrat and those that will put on the sympathetic to the Republican side, that kind of negates the need for all of that, doesn't it? Because according to the Democrats, anybody with any sort of anyone with any American view, basically, is
a fascist.
Is a fascist. So the need to go marching around with armbands and all the appurtenances is irrelevant now. The other side, and you know, particularly if you take a look at the optics from the other day with Joe Biden standing on stage with two Marines behind him, flooded in blood red, it seems to be the Democrats, the Western liberal cabal, the deep fake system, whatever term you want to apply to it, that is, you know, alleviating us of the need to exert much more energy than they're employing, because, you know,
yes.
That's a comment, not a question or a point, but I thought it might give you inspiration, Tom.
Sure. Look, I'm pretty much sure that Nick will shares my opinions as far as this narrative, that's a popular word, narrative, is concerned. And I guess the same goes, of course, for the Jewish question. I guess it's no accident that this Jewish question is not being openly debated, even in our circles. But then again, this is, to some extent, let's not forget, this is also an issue that goes deep into the theological realm. And I wrote about this recently. I wrote a piece for the Occidental Observer about how to become an anti-Semite. You know, what does that mean? So certainly, and I guess I got to say that I think it's a little bit nonsensical and a little bit weird even, and I don't want to hurt the feelings of many Catholics or many Christians, but let's say making some derogatory remarks about, let's say, Jews on the East Coast, or let's say Melbourne, or some big agencies over in Australia, and spoofing them or making fun of them, let alone, using some illegal means. And yet at the same time, prostrating myself in front of a Levantine, I don't want to sound cynical, Levantine deities, or preaching Jesus Christ and the apostles, who are basically all Jews to start with. It just doesn't make sense. But this dilemma, I guess I would certainly like to address this dilemma, this Judeo-Christian dilemma, in one of my possible speeches in Australia, especially for younger audience. This is where I have problems with many Christians and Bible preachers or Bible thumpers, if you want to put it that way, even with some of my close colleagues. How can you be an anti-Semite? And it's a nonsense. And yet at the same time, most of those anti-Semites are fervent Christians, be they Orthodox Christians or Catholic Christians, and they do sincerely believe in those Jewish prophets. Just look at the names of Tertullian, St. Augustine, and there's lots of them. I wrote quite extensively about that. So I would say, quite frankly, this primitive type of anti-Semitism, the way it has been played out over the last couple hundred years, I call it simply a neurosis. A neurosis. And if we ever renounce, if it ever happens, I'm not advocating that, by the way. I'm Catholic myself in a civilizational manner and so on. It's a very difficult issue, and I don't want to go too far because I wouldn't like to hurt the feelings of some of your viewers. But I just don't think the whole phenomenon, pathology of anti-Semitism will go away unless we first and foremost, unfortunately, and I'm quoting and paraphrasing Nietzsche, unless we first and foremost dump and ditch, our Christian heritage, which of course it doesn't go that way. So again, this is the issue, and I must say I've been very much influenced by Nietzsche and Alain de Benoit, and not just by Nietzsche, but also Heidegger wrote about this, and of course in a very, very difficult lingo, very hard, but just got to study it and read it. And I guess I'd like to give a lecture. Why not? I feel myself personally more at home with reading Homer or Odyssey or some exploits of from Greek mythology than reading the Bible, and some Levantine type of a prose that I cannot quite familiarize myself with. I guess the problem of foreign migrants coming out from Asia, from Africa to the UK or to England and even to the Balkans, we just won't be able to solve it unless we first and foremost solve the issue of ecumenism, or this globalism. Its first roots can be found in the Christian doctrine of universalism. So now what we are basically observing are just the secular expressions of it. What is liberalism and Marxism are basically the secular expressions of this global civitas Dei, of this godlike type of a city on the hill that you have in the States and that you have now in the European Union. I'm sorry if I just don't want to derail too much and go out of our thread. There are so many ideas crossing my mind, but there are certain issues we have to address quite explicitly.
Well, it's interesting, inside our broad camp, there can often be a very genuine freedom of speech that a lot of our opponents don't credit us with. And I've noticed that on issues of philosophy and theology, philosophy, they're very closely related subjects. There are many views, and it's interesting how we can debate them, but according to our enemies, I suppose the only way we debate is we do a Joe Stalin on everybody. It's a different thing. But I just raised an interesting, just an aside, I was saying to you before we spoke on air that there's an incredible investigation being done in an Australian court, and it's the so-called case of the Croatian six men accused over 40 years ago of a bombing campaign. It's all a police conspiracy. It's a secret police conspiracy. It's a police conspiracy. It's perjury. It's everything you want to name. to bring that back to the current discussion, what would really deeply disturb me in any of our countries would be if a group of men, particularly men, found themselves up on criminal charges and maybe they're only a little bit guilty. Maybe they've done some particular thing, but they haven't done the whole thing. And they find themselves arraigned on supercharges. The establishments or establishment in one country or another manages a horrendous terror trial. Like I know, Nick, I think in the UK, Operation Canova has just delivered its report or is about to deliver its report into certain terrorism in Northern Ireland. And whether or not MI5 and whatever were involved, military, in actually organising the IRA hitmen and gunmen and so on. This is the sort of thing.
Give me 1 minute, excuse me. 1 minute. I'm just going to grab some water.
Indeed. I would be...
Yes, Jim, keep going.
as long as Tom can hear me and put the discussion back, it would be one thing that would be deeply worrying if it was organised in such a way that a lot of these mistakes are committed by odd groups of people, and rather than get just some charges, we end up with supercharges. We had something like that in Australia about 30 odd years ago with a so-called terror trial where someone was accused of hundreds of offences and so on. And yet it lends itself to that. The Croatian 6 trial in Australia shows that the establishment can organise for you events that put men in jail for decades. And
yes, indeed. I happen to know even the people. I know some of their families as well. So this is the story I've been following quite extensively.
Indeed.
Again, I don't want to monopolize this discussion, but again, I'm surprised, positively surprised, that the Australian judiciary is bringing light now that they openly discuss about this, which is quite uncommon in Germany. You got thousands of people over the last two years that have been sentenced and that have been framed and trumped up charges of anti-Semitism, whatever. The German judiciary is probably worse than the DDR judiciary, the Yugoslav communist judiciary. Again, I have a privilege, as I said, whatever. My dad was in prison twice. My sister was in prison. My whole family did suffer quite a bit in communist Yugoslavia. So I'm sorry to say, I'm sorry to observe what's going on in the United States of America with the Justice Department, with the Department of Homeland Security, with the FBI. Jesus, that people are getting framed. Even some of my colleagues. You got 1,000 people now being processed in the American judiciary system, in the so-called land of the brave and the free. Similar issues that Nick is much more familiar with. And again, this is all the replica, in a sense, I should say, that of what I observed as a young boy, not that young, and with my old man, with my father, and so on. The same type of a thing, people getting smeared as Nazis, as fascists, as terrorists. These are all shut-up words. Now what we are seeing, gentlemen, is the same replica repeating in the so-called West. I hope, as long as we're here, as long as we teach and enlighten a little bit the crowd about those semantic distortions, there is some chance of having some success.
Nick.
Yeah. So before I go on, basically, Nathan, to come back to the point you raised, let's get down to the real specifics of how these groups operate. I just want to say I completely disagree with Tom about the Christian position. You're starting off with the point, Judeo-Christian. There's no such thing. The Jews, even before they hate white people, they hate Christians. They hate Christ. When you're dealing with the people who are taught to spit every time they go past a church from childhood, that's the crux of it. And the genuine Christianity, whether it's traditional Catholicism, Calvinism, Orthodoxy, or whatever, all of them would be very, very clear about how they've replaced the Jews as the chosen people. They look to Jesus talking about the synagogue of Satan, etc., etc. And I would say that if you take religion out, if you take the Christian religion out of our European society culture, you won't end up with a secular society, because mankind, again, it's instinctive. People are hardwired to be religious. So if you take our traditional religion, and Christianity, although of Levantine origin, was absolutely westernized by things like Easter, Christmas, these were our ancestors' pagan festivals. If you take that westernized religion out, you don't end up in a healthy, sane, racist, secular society. You end up with people believing in climate change and Gaia and all the rest of it, or becoming Muslims. So for all sorts of reasons, I believe that Tom's wrong. I understand where he's coming from, and as Jim said, we can discuss these things, but let's perhaps have a whole show where we talk about those things. So get back to the purpose of this show and talking about these groups. So Nathan, you were talking about Patriotic Alternative there, or you didn't mention them, talking about the fact that one of their key people, who's in his late 30s, now up on hate speech terror charges, was encouraging young lads of 15 or 16 to send him basically semi-naked pictures showing how their bodybuilding is going on, and gruesome, grotesque stuff, which the public obviously would be horrified by. But that's not the crux of it. The crux of what Patriotic Alternative has been doing deeply, deeply wrong, and what makes it clear that whatever the good intentions of many of the people involved, there's something very, very dark at the heart of it, is they were telling people not just to go to the gym and get fit. Okay, now that's fair enough. They were also telling people to collect information on our political opponents on the far left, which is automatically a breach of Britain's admittedly thoroughly over-the-top anti-terror terror laws. But they're telling them to break the law by collecting information on the far left, which is automatically information which could be of use to a terrorist organization, especially when they're talking about, we're going to fight these communists, we're going to kill them, blah, 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 in their private circles. And then having collected it, that's the first breach of the law, and a serious breach of anti-terror law. They're then telling these people and telling them how to do it, that they can configure their computers so that it's not just encrypted, it's hidden on their computer hard drive. And if the police come, they just don't tell them it's there, and the police look at the soft stuff that's visible. So first of all, of course, the police can crack all of this stuff anyway, and then see what they didn't want them to see. But also it means that the minute this young fool refuses to tell the police the password so they can get in, he's again in breach of another anti-terror law. So he's going to prison for a very, very long time. And when they started telling people this about a year ago, I and other people pointed out the appalling implications, the deep danger they were putting their people in. And if they'd been genuine, they would have said, we've made a mistake. Or they might even have, if they're proud, they might have admitted it, but they changed things. And instead, that's still going on. So, and they're just saying, oh, Griffin's just jealous because he used to have a big party, now he hasn't. And we've got lots of people. So they haven't addressed the point. They've also, in the same little group within this, the upper echelons of Patriotic Alternative, are promoting books by key figures in what's a now defunct online forum called the Iron Forum, which was heavily involved. The Iron March, the forum Iron March, heavily involved, not just in promoting Charlottesville and all the rest of it, but promoting Atomwaffen division, the misanthropic division, promoting and creating national action, which is now prescribed in Britain. So the whole of this organisation, regardless of the fact that the kids bought into it, think they're just handing out leaflets and getting a tug from the police for that, think they're just going on a camp, think they're just talking about potentially when they're older homeschooling their kids. They're involved in an organisation which is going to be prescribed as a terrorist organisation. And the one success that PA's had, they've actually, partly because it's a soft, people can get involved in it. You can say you remember, you don't have to pay anything. So, but they've appealed to young middle class kids, which the British National Party, the National Front, never did. I was one of the only middle class people in the BNP. That's it. There was a time when the NF appealed to middle class kids back in the 70s, but that had gone. So for the first time in 50 years, you've got an organisation which has actually appealed to middle class kids, and they've got several thousand of them involved at one level or another, which means that when it's prescribed, that's the entire potential next generation of nationalist organisers and nationalist leaders with some skills, with some social graces, with some status in society. And every single one of them is going to be tarred with this deadly brush, which means that every organisation that they go into will in turn be tarred. So one of the key things, the use of pseudo gangs to damage the opposition was created by the British, by a British general called Arthur Kitson, who developed the idea, first of all, when fighting the Mau Mau in Kenya. and they created pseudo gangs who looked like Mau Mau, either because they were blacked up white men or because they had loyal natives. They looked like Mau Mau, they behaved like Mau Mau, and that helped them get into Mau Mau areas and wipe out the opposition or disgrace the Mau Mau, which didn't actually take much doing because it was a ghastly, basically satanic Negro race hate, Marxist horror of an organization. But anyway, from that theory, they developed, and it's taught in Sandhurst and it's taught in the police college and all the rest of it, the idea that the best way to deal with opposition is to pollute the water in which the fish swim.
Yep.
And this is a classic example. As I say, for the next 10 or 15 years, any organization in Britain which arises at whatever it's doing, I'm not talking party politics necessarily, half the time for that, but whether it's that or some sort of cultural organization or a sports group or a group for supporting young white kids who are having children themselves, whatever it is, one or two of these people will end up in it, because they've got to go somewhere. And the minute they're spotted, bang, that's it. These organizations are damned themselves. So by way of polluting the water in which the fish swim, patriotic alternative is even better than the National Action scam, which it follows, mimics, and is run by the same people.
And you know, the parallel organisation in Australia, which I won't name, the young blokes were also indoctrinated via that very same website, via that very same, Iron March. And, you know, it's like it, as I say, I keep saying this, but it's like it comes out of a handbook, you know, and yet there's, I call them Teflon instigators. There's these elements that seem to recur that never get into trouble. That you know, they do the worst things, they say the worst things, but they never get into trouble. They're like demonic Pied Pipers, you know. Although the Pied Piper technically was demonic, wasn't he? Because he was trying to run a bunch of kids off. So I kept forgetting that. You always think of a nice signifier when you think of the Pied Piper. I'm thinking he's not.
No, he's not. He's a bad guy.
Damn right. So, Tom, you want to? Can I ask you? Do you have something to contribute to what Nick just said?
Oh, I fully agree with you. Nick is a good friend of mine, so I don't want to make any disclaimers. I presume this is not the time now to talk about my own transcendental experiences. I was raised in a very strong traditional Catholic family, and I was, in fact, even supposed to be a priest when I was a boy and so on. Because at that time, you know, Christianity or Catholicism, especially in Croatia, during the Cold War, you know, during the Tito's time, the Christian Church was the only bulwark against communism. So it was literally an institution that, to some extent, of course, it was heavily spied. It was infiltrated by the UDBA, the Yugoslav Secret Service agents, and so on. But it did present a certain amount of let's say, freedom, at least to churchgoers. So I guess, but it's certainly a thing that we need to address one of these times, because I do have friends who are very much on the Nietzschean side, on the pagan side, both in Germany especially, and of course in the UK, and of course in the United States of America. So I think this issue of Judaism on the theological.
In your book, Homo Americanus, you did make a very good argument about the contradiction. Now, Nick discounted the Judeo-Christian, but that does seem to be a very American phenomenon, doesn't it? Because a lot of that Midwestern churches believe that the Jews are the chosen people.
Sure. Look,
and it's very contradictory.
We can now, of course, you know, make some critical remarks about the Jewish influence at the Fed and in the cabinet of Joe Biden. We can talk about the general influence in academia and, of course, in the financial sector as well. But let us not forget, you know, people I'm sort of concerned with the Christian Zionists. You know, you got millions of them in the South who actually consider themselves more Jewish than the Jews themselves, who actually want to out-Jew Jews, you know. And I guess these are the problem with those folks. So I guess things are quite complicated, so they're not that easy. And I certainly would like to have a discussion with you, hopefully a speech, an academic speech, one of these days on the monotheism and polytheism. And I guess because whether we like it or not, even if we don't go to church any longer, the fact of the matter is that I was deeply imbued and I was impregnated with this Catholicism. And I must say to Nick, yes, I certainly feel much more comfortable drinking my espresso, my coffee, near the Zagreb Cathedral here nearby, 5 miles from where I live, or for that matter in Köln, in Cologne. It's a nice cathedral, which was heavily damaged, you know, by the English bombers, by the way, during the Second World War. Anyway, and by the by, you know, I got to tell you, I'm deeply concerned by the fact that, you know who is now visiting Zagreb. Now all roads have been blocked here in the vicinity, a mile from where I live. Erdogan, this big Turkish fellow. So I asked myself in retrospect, I don't want to say the word, what have we been fighting for 300 years? The cross. We're fighting the Turks, the Ottomans, and now they are going to consecrate right in my vicinity, about 20 miles where I live, the big mosque. And Erdogan is going to be there. Yesterday he was in Serbia, and the day before yesterday he was in Bosnia and Herzegovina. You know, the big guy. You know, of course they have their ambitions, they have their historical memory. Once upon a time in the 16th century, the 17th century, they came all the way to Carinthia, to Passau, to southern Germany. They came 20 miles from Venice. And now, of course, Erdogan, I'm trying to avoid my emotions now. But the fact of the matter is that the Serbian government, the Croatian government today are so servile that literally he had a red carpet meeting yesterday. There were 200 people from different securities from Turkey and Croatia. All roads are literally blocked today in Croatia, in Zagreb itself where I live. So, of course, you asked me the question. I certainly feel much more comfortable drinking my coffee and having my croissant in near the Chartres or Westminster, if you wish, in England, near some Catholic church or Catholic basilica, than observing now this big expensive mosque 20 miles south from where I live, which was financed by the Turkish government. Okay. So again, the history does repeat itself. Keep in mind, you know, I don't want to go now to the, you know.
Can I ask Tom a question?
So go ahead. You know,
coming back to the question,
I get carried away a little bit with this.
Coming back to the core of this program, was it? I think the Soviets, they ran a thing in the very early days in the Civil War times. Was it Operation Trust, I believe, where they conned various whites, including the senior military figures and so on, into thinking now wasn't the time to attack the Bolsheviks because they were getting weaker, they should wait. And Lenin, I think, talked about having a controlled opposition. So to what extent historically are you aware of did the communists pioneer? I talked about Kitson and pseudo gangs coming out of the 1950s in Kenya. Is it in fact this controlled opposition type operation, was it in fact pioneered by the Bolsheviks?
You mean here in which?
Well, in the Soviet Union, and for that matter also in Croatia, former Yugoslavia.
Well, look, we mentioned a while ago, let me backpedal a little bit, let's put things in a historical context. You mentioned a while ago, Nathan, the Croatian Six and the Australian judiciary, which is now, of course, let's call it its judicial review. It's the apology on the part of the Australian government as far as those 6 Croats, quote unquote, terrorists. In fact, they were not terrorists, they were framed. But the problem is, you always got to keep in mind that the Croatian Secret Service, the Yugoslav Secret Service during the Cold War period, I don't want to say explicitly, I don't have the empirical data on it, but I know folks who do have, you know, I can refer to you. And in fact, they worked the Yugoslav communist thugs, if you wish, or cutthroats. They worked hand in hand also with different foreign West and also Australian secret services, because Croatia, independent Croatia, Croatian nationalism was not welcome, both in the West and in the East. So, of course, you just don't want to blame the the Yugoslav Secret Service. We had a similar case in Ostedu, like it was a cold friend of mine. He just passed away just a couple of months ago. There was an attempt of assassination in Scotland, I'll tell you, in 1990. And he was severely wounded. And then, of course, this guy was caught later on. This guy was a big scandal in Croatia. Anyway, I just wouldn't like to bombard you now with too many issues and too many names. But keep in mind that during the Cold War, the Yugoslav Secret Services, if not explicitly, but implicitly, they worked hand in hand with the German security, with the German, with the Italian, and with the American Secret Service. And of course, because it was in the interest of the West to keep Yugoslavia intact, to keep it together as a multicultural model for the future European Union. Again, you see, we have now tackled many, many issues which needs to be examined quite full in detail. So we didn't have, despite the fact that Croats have their communities in Melbourne, they even have the busts of if you wish, fascist leaders, Ante Pavelic over there, and they're good folks. I know them very, very well. But the fact of the matter is that the Australian judiciary hasn't been very, very kind to many, many Croats over the last 50, 60, 70 years, despite some certain issues that are certainly better off than in Germany, or for that matter in the UK. Now let's forget about the First Amendment, and even now the First Amendment. I don't know how long it will last in the United States of America. But anyway, folks, this is such a nice issue, and I would like to specifically, if you don't mind, I wouldn't like to pontificate, Nick, but we can talk a little bit about the judiciary in the UK and Germany, or for that matter, Australia, next time when we get together. And I'll be very pleased to probably, again, make some comparisons with the Yugoslav judiciary and the Croatian judiciary as of now, which has become the carbon copy of the EU judiciary. Mm-hmm. So, of course, things in terms of freedom of expression, in terms of hate speech, if you wish. It's a new Anglicism. Hate speech didn't even exist. Even in communist Yugoslavia, we didn't use that expression. But things are certainly, in terms of freedom of speech, not as good as they were, let's say, 20 years back when Yugoslavia emerged and when Croatia emerged on the map in the early 90s. Because Tudjman himself, the first president, I knew him personally. My dad knew him and so on. He was a revisionist. He was a revisionist scholar in a positive sense. He actually had destroyed certain Yugoslavian communist and Western myths about Jasenovac. It was a camp, it was a fascist camp here in Croatia, and implicitly, that's why he had problems with some Zionist circles in Washington. You know what he said in March 1993 when he visited the Holocaust Museum. It was right in the midst of war. He started, saying some things very undiplomatically about the Auschwitz body counts and so on. And he got into big troubles with that. And of course, this resulted, of course, in a negative on the field, and because Croatia was in war then with communist Yugoslavia, with Serbian paramilitary as well. At the same time, it was blasted on all wavelengths as being a revisionist and fascist and an Ustaše country because of some of his undiplomatic remarks by Tudjman in March 1993. I was there when he visited the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., and then he started. You imagine, he said, when he started talking about this big tally, about the 6 million figure, and he got into big problems afterwards.
Well, Jim, speaking of Holocaust museums, we recently had a bunch of very clever lads in South Australia stand in front of Adelaide's Holocaust Museum, executing salutes from another era. And,
yeah. Well, look, I know we're coming to the conclusion of our time.
Yes,
and
I will have to sign off in 10 minutes. I'm sorry, folks. Yeah, but I would certainly be pleased. I'm sorry to interrupt you, folks. If we could schedule another meeting, probably a week from now, and so on.
Yeah.
Well,
I just like to say that
we will choose a topic that satisfies your breadth of intellectual expansionism.
Indeed. But I just wanted to say that Nick, I think, mentioned the website Iron March, And I actually had an experience with a person off that very website who contacted me regarding my PhD thesis. This was, I'll just say, a few years ago, whenever that website existed. And he wrote on the website, I understand, before it was taken down or banned or whatever it was, that he spoke with me at some length. And I almost persuaded him that his cultic preoccupation was wrong. But he saw the truth. He saw the light. And he rejected the fact that I was taking him off the path of truth and righteousness into some dark place, and he returned to his belief. Now, I was never aware that I was a counselor. I was never aware that I was a theologian. I was never aware of any of these things. But the thing that it taught me is actually the point that we've been making. Some people have ended up in a bad place, and it's governed by certain rules. And it sometimes happens that the truth, whatever we're trying to put forward, doesn't reach these folk. They're not interested in the truth because the lie appears to, well, not even the lie, I'll call it a falsehood. A lie means, as you said before, Nick, that a Brigadier Kitson type character is preaching a lie. But with a lot of people now, it's a falsehood. They find something and they think it's true. I mean, we live in a world, as George Orwell said, of universal deceit. Anything could be true. The moon could be made out of cheese. Who knows? But we're at that stage where it's very hard to actually say to some people, listen, you're on the wrong road here, come back. And because the falsehood actually appears to be much more colourful than a simple truth that you sketched out before. And that's something that worries me deeply.
It never occurs to them to take that energy and expend it outside the Department of Immigration. Nick?
Well,
yeah, I'd say that Jim's absolutely right, that I've come across this mentality so often. And partly, as I said right at the start, it's this innate instinctive thing to form your own cult. But there's also an element with these people. A lot of them they're aware they're antisocial. They're aware they're, what is nowadays described as autistic and so on. They're also bloody lazy and very often cowardly. And strangely enough, because you think someone standing up and doing Nazi salutes and so on, that's very brave, you're going to get put in prison. No, there's a cowardice going on here with some of them, that they don't want to have to do the real serious daily work. That is, if you're involved in real politics, if you're going to try and win through the ballot box, which I'd say don't, pass that. But if you're going to, you have to engage with real people. You have to talk about the things that worry real people. You have to do things about the things that worry real people. You have to get your hands dirty with blocked drains and stuff like that. And you have to work very, very hard, because the other parties, the ones who hold those seats, they don't just hold the seats, they also get the money that comes with holding those seats, whether it's the salary or the kickbacks from being on the planning department, whatever. You're involved in, you're trying to take people's livelihood and turf away from them, and they work very hard to keep it, and they fight clean and they also fight dirty. So it's really difficult and it's really hard work, and it's far, far easier to make yourself so repulsive that the public don't want to go near you. The public are all stupid, moronic, goyim sheep. You don't want to go near them. So you can sit around and drink whatever or use whatever kind of recreational drug you want to use, considering your fat backsides, doing sweet FA. And that is actually what is another common denominator with nearly all these groups. They talk a good fight, they don't do anything practical.
Well,
Nathan, I would like to apologize, folks, and I would like to again extend my greetings. I need to sign off, and I certainly would like to have another podcast with you in a not too distant future. Nick, my best greetings to all of you, and let's keep in touch. I have some speeches in Bavaria, in Munich, with some of our folks in November. Might probably have something earlier. And please, gentlemen, if there are some younger folks, not younger, can be older folks as well, don't get me wrong, the women, men, whatever, if I can be of any assistance whatsoever to folks in people, students, blue-collar workers in Australia, please feel free to give them my website and my Gmail address, and I'd be happy to get in touch with them, especially as far as books are concerned, especially as far as my books in German, English, and French, some classics especially. Why not talk about Quincy a little bit? To talk Chesterton is a great Catholic author who influenced me very much. I had to read him, my old man, when I was a boy. I had to read Chesterton always. Thank you, and I'm sorry, folks, I have some private errands.
Yeah. Okay, well, I suppose we'll wind up in a moment too.
Thanks very much for joining us.
Good night, Tom.
Now, I was going to say, Nick, that out of those national action, it wasn't actually any of the members that committed any of the crimes that made it so infamous, though, was it? They were people on the periphery.
Yeah, it's what they said about a couple of the cases, particularly I think it was the murder of the Cox, the Labour MP. And it's basically when people made light of this, joked about it or appeared in some way to approve it, that was the point at which the state brought the hammer down. So yeah, they, by the standards of real crime, these people haven't done anything at all. It's pathetic. It's deeply, deeply evil by the state to be locking kids up very often for the sort of things they've done. That they condemn themselves. No one's going to take them seriously. That's it. Leave them alone. It's shocking that their lives are ruined because of this. But we are where we are. That's the mentality of the liberal elite. That's the power they have. And if you put yourself at their mercy, they won't show you any.
But that's the point we're trying to communicate in this video, that it is such a serious and dirty game.
Yeah.
Beware who you listen to and who you follow, because there should be abounding common sense by now, given the amount of evidence of what will happen to you. Yeah, it should be prima facie evident, and yet there is still people that will incite them with the "stop being keyboard warriors. What are you going to do?" And you're going to get up, and even with that call to arms, what is their call? What does it mean? What does something mean? What is something?
Technically, I suppose some people who've been in this business for a long time, and I know we're coming towards the end of our time, become somewhat professional in seeing this stuff and being able to identify it, oppose it, counsel, do whatever we can. But it is very, very daunting for a person maybe around the 20-year-old mark. They're up against people who are well trained in these operations, people who've got resources, who can tap any phone, tap any internet server, get into any encrypted device. So there's no secrets. They can be anywhere. They can put someone right next to you. They can involve you in a conversation. This sort of stuff that's gone on here, I know it's gone on in the UK, Nick. There's no professionalism in these groups at being able to fight it. It's hard enough for us. It's catastrophic for us to try to get sense sometimes out of people and make sure that the right thing is done at any particular time.
But I have to say it's a generational thing too, because when I was a young bloke, the last place I would have turned, if I was getting involved in something serious, the last place I would turn to for moral guidance is someone my own age. You know what I mean? I'd be looking for some demonstrable proof of experience, and so I see it as also a part of the convergence of the new technologies and the subcultural divisions that come from those as well, because these young people are attracted to their own age group, and they become unified in an insular culture.
Well, that's the problem.
And it's wrong because, as I say, that's insular, yet the problem they're looking at is exterior. It's outside, it's in the past. So they're looking the wrong way through the lens,
They are absolutely right there. And again, not wanting to be too hard, not wanting to be hard on them, unnecessarily hard. There's a reason in to degree why they have to, because as you said, there was a time when youngsters would look to older people for guidance. Well, in the case of white nationalism, whatever you want to call it, that is very difficult when the state and its various allies have worked so hard to smash, break, and demonize genuine nationalist organizations that, whereas what you should have had this is across the board, whether it's in France, Germany, Britain, or whatever, you should have well-established nationalist organizations and political parties in their niches, perhaps not in power, but at least stable, relevant, and with a degree amongst their people, a degree of kudos for having done it, had the success, and there's a continuity there. And so young people should be able to get involved with them. And there's 3 or 4 on the list of national action prisoners who I specifically, when they were in the BNP, I specifically told them, do not go down that road. It's a dead end and you will go to prison. And they ignored me, and so they are in prison. And there's some other people who started to get involved with NA, who I said, don't go down that road, and they didn't, and they're not in prison. So I tried, and sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't work. But when right the way across the board, France, Germany, Britain, and so on, they've done so much to hinder and damage and break up genuine nationalist organizations, they've automatically left these kids with no role models in their own belief system. So then naturally they go looking and they find very bad role models which are pushed in front of them. So it's a win-win for the liberal elite. They've broken the continuity of the old organizations, and now they can do what they want with the new ones, and there's not the experience there to deal with it. It's very tragic, but it's also so bloody blatant that you would think that those with some degree of brains and streetwise, there's a problem because middle class kids don't have the streetwise that working class kids have. But really, you'd think that someone would have the brains to listen to what people like us are saying, take notes, and get the hell out of it. And I suppose at a certain point, you have to say, we've been telling them, because we talked about this issue in past shows between us. I know that Jim has been talking about this for many, many years. I've spoken about it in Britain and continental meetings as well. We've told them, there comes a point you have to say, if you're so bloody stupid, it's your problem. It's not mine. I've got no sympathy for you whatsoever. I still have sympathy for these kids, the young ones, but there comes a point they get to a certain age. We told them, they've seen it happen, they haven't taken any notice. Well,
what can you do?
Nothing to do with us.
Okay, well, I've got no further comment to make, Nick.
Yeah, I do. The
I'll let Nathan wind up the show.
The ageism is actually in their book of tactics, and I know this because in one of the articles that was written about by pre-sentencing, I think it was a story written by one of the left-wing journalists that was actually responsible for whipping up the case against me. And in his reportage, he added all this superfluous garbage about how in a related project he'd done, he sent undercover operative into one of these youth groups, let's call them, and he investigated them that way. And he said that when reporting on me, well, we happen to know from the insider footage that these young people think Jim Saleam and this are just too old and are jokes. And I'm thinking, well, you're a Walkley Award-winning journalist, sir. One, how is that detail relevant to the story? You've stuffed that up the arse of the story for a particular purpose, and that echoes a hell of a lot of the what you'll hear from the left in their nigglings against us. Oh, they're too old, the young blokes. It's fostered. It has to be a tactic that's fostered. And in doing so, as you say, you break that chain of advice that could well keep these people safe and could guarantee a next generation. You invalidate that point. voice. It's cancel culture. It's cancel culture. And when you got young white nationalists using it on, the others, it's particularly insidious. But, well, we did manage to get to the heart of that topic. I felt like I wanted to scoop more out of it because it's so ongoing. I see these groups come up, they go, but then up springs another one. Just when they've gone, you think, oh, good-o, we can step in and just start arguing coherent nationalism. But no, because up it comes again, as sure as, the bloke in the, ASIO office has just poured himself another cup of coffee, up it comes again, Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us again. I hope to have more of these conversations. We'll try to remain a little bit more on song next time, but it's been fascinating nonetheless. I should just ask you though, before you leave, Nick, you've got a new Prime Minister, mate. She's called Liz Truss. A truss, of course, was once upon a time.
It's very easily answered, Nathan. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss.
The old boss.
But isn't this one even more liberal for a conservative? Like, hasn't she only got 3 white guys or something?
She's very, very liberal. She's formally a Remainer, and the core of her cabinet is non-white, and that's really all you can say. Shockingly, despite having come from a Liberal Democrat background at the time when they were well to the left of the Labour Party, she is actually, to some extent, quite reasonably right-wing by modern Conservative standards. The hypocritical pig that she's appointed as the Health Secretary is a monstrous-looking female thing, but actually she's a fairly traditional Catholic. She voted against same-sex marriage, and she's pro-life. So it's actually rather confusing that I think she's there because she's a woman and she's a mate of Liz Truss's, and she makes Liz Truss look pretty. So I don't think Liz Truss is very intelligent. I don't know if you saw, she was made a total fool of by the very clever Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, who asked her at Rostov-on-Don and whether that should be a Russian city, and she was talking about, oh, it's been invaded, it doesn't belong to Russia. Of course, it's always been in Russia and never in Crimea. So she's a bird of not particular brain, which suits those who are already running the show. And the one thing you can say about her is that she's slightly less of a warmonger than Ben Wallace, who was one of the others who might have got the job. And she's really no more of a warmonger than Boris Johnson. So nothing will change. She does show that she's prepared to throw vast amounts of money, although claiming to be a sort of Thatcherite conservative. She's throwing vast amounts of money. It's being announced today. It's probably going to be the same is being spent to bail out households and small businesses from the energy price catastrophe. They're going to be spending the same on that as they do on the National Health Service. And we're talking about vast sums of money simply being printed. So she's certainly, although she wants to channel Thatcher, she isn't actually a Thatcherite. There again, what could she do? How does she get out of that mess? There's only 2 ways to do it. Print vast sums of money, which will do enormous long-term damage to Britain and pile unrepayable debts on future generations and make lots of money for the banks. Or she could simply say that the squabble between Russia and Ukraine is nothing to do with Britain, and the prices would crash immediately. So what's she going to do? She's going to carry on warmongering against Russia. She's going to carry on printing money and driving Britain closer and closer to the economic collapse, for which we are all fervent admirers. The sooner it happens, the better.
But there's also something else that's going to happen. These people are going to now. I can't say that the Queen's ever going to have an early grave. It's been 8 years or something now. 96 years. but by God, she's leaning on a walking stick now. The Prime Ministers keep coming so thick and fast, don't they? She's got a great...
Okay, well, very nice to see you, gentlemen.
And you,
I look forward to seeing you again in the very near future.